The third and final video opens with a discussion on the weapons of HIIT training. After taking into account the athlete, the sport, the context, the training, and the overall plan and outcome, coaches and trainers can fine-tune their HIIT training weapons. Dr. Larsen explains that there are a number of ways to accomplish a HIIT training session. The variables that impact when it's done, where it's done, for how long it's done, and why it's done, results in that final HIIT training weapon. This segment finishes with Dr. Larsen's insights on how nutrition can impact performance and overall outcomes over time. He also talks about his personal experience using UCAN Superstarch with himself and his athletes.
We've got to move on to these key weapons. You want to learn what those key weapons are, and that brings us to what they are and how to fine tune them as well. So this kind of relates to that target type. And this is a lay of the land. This is really what we want to produce for for you as a practitioner. We want you appreciating your context, knowing your physiological targets, aerobic, anaerobic, neuromuscular, forming the 5 key weapons, fine-tuning them, knowing the variables and how to do that before you form your final weapon. So let's see what those are. Here's your long interval. This is typically sitting around your VO2 max power output for 2 to 5 minutes with recoveries of 1 to 4 minutes, typically passive. We can hit our type 3 or type 4 targets, right? So aerobic, anaerobic, or aerobic, anaerobic, neuromuscular, depending on how we kind of go about that. This is Kyle's going to demonstrate one of these. This is he did this just before that Ironman South Africa win. So this is 4 to 6 by 3 minutes at 415 watts with 2 minutes rest. And even if you're in the team sport context, or if you're in the if you're a personal trainer, there's some key elements that you want to really pay attention to in this example session Kyle's doing. Listen to the lungs being activated, and clearly he's right at the maximal capacity of his aerobic system. All right, same with the anaerobic system. That one's maximally taxed as well. Right? This is what and that's what it feels like. So that's really what you're going for in that long interval type of session.
And
the next one's
sorry to interrupt you, but importantly on the bike though, that's low neuromuscular impact, correct?
Agree. I would say that is mostly, there's a little bit of neuromuscular strain, when you're doing these, but relative, if Kyle's going to do this on the run, it definitely moves to a type 4 if he's doing that equivalent session on the run. But yeah, in this condition, you're spot on, Natalie. This is mostly kind of a type 3 session because that's not going to be too bad in terms of the neuromuscular musculoskeletal strain. I can program in something behind that, and he's going to be able to do it, right? Like a run session could follow that, shortly after, and it's not going to be too bad for Kyle. All right, so yeah, really good point. The next weapon is the short interval, and this is the most versatile of all the weapons. This is again, when you take the course in the book, this is what you really sort of learn. So notice all the different target types that we can hit there. Type 1s through 4. You can really manipulate things around, but typically these are sitting around the 100 to 120% of the velocity at the end of an incremental test for 10 to 60 seconds with equivalent recovery durations. Typically passive, but they can also be done in that if you're that maximal aerobic conditioning situation, more in the active condition. The cool thing about the short interval really relates to myoglobin. I mentioned this before. You'll probably, if you're listening, you'll probably more so be familiar with hemoglobin, right? Which is our oxygen carrying protein that sits in our blood. Well, the myoglobin, that word myo, meaning muscle, is the muscle equivalent. And it's often underappreciated, but it resaturates so quickly in 10 on, 10 off intervals. So there's 2 examples here. We've got a 10-second interval and a 60-second interval with, I guess, equivalent kind of recovery periods. But notice just how aerobic this sort of situation is relative to the 60-second interval. Right? That longer 60-second short interval is really creating an oxygen deficit, which relates to that, this is more of a lactic type session. This one's going to hurt a lot more. Whereas this one, this 10-second on, 10-second off, this blew us away when we learned this first, but you can actually be near VO2 max repeating these, but at a very low level of blood lactate, like only 4, right?
Really?
Relative to this one's sitting well above, 10 or 10 or 15 on the 60-second one. But this one, yeah, it's just absolutely amazing, blew us away, and it's all due to the quick resaturation of the myoglobin. So yeah, pretty cool little manipulation factor there.
Wow.
Yeah, neat, eh?
Yeah.
So that's really shown here, and this is in our for the busy slide. This is shown in our review where, yeah, the 10 on, 10 off. Notice it down there, sitting around the low lactate levels, and the longer the interval kind of goes, the more engagement really of the lactate sessions you're going to get. So the more, yeah, so it really relates to the type 1s and 2s versus the type 3s and the type 4s. Notice the red bar kind of being engaged there in the 3s and 4s.
Right. And as a brief reminder to listeners, if you look under the type 1 through type 4s, there's a green, red, and black one. Green's the aerobic demand, red is the anaerobic glycolytic, and black is the neuromuscular demand. And which one is taxed in each different type. Is that fair to say, Paul?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. So it's the degree of taxing of that system. Acknowledging that they're all taxed in every session to some degree, but it's the degree, right? It's the emphasis that we're talking about here.
Going back to your microcycles and things like that, you're able to say, hey, I want to schedule this because it has low neuromuscular taxing versus a type 4, right?
You got it. You got it. That's right. So let's look at this one. This might be one where it's a little bit, it's actually, more towards the type 1 type session. All right. This is 20 on, 10 off. I mean, it probably should be more 10 on, 10 off if it were really, but like it's going to give the example. This is an Olympic World Cup skier. So he's 120% of the velocity associated with an incremental test score. You just have a look at this here. Well, you can see the parameters here on the Moxie. It's doing 20 on, 10 off. All right, it's kind of between maybe a type 1 and a type 3, but it gives the sort of the principle. It's not too bad. That 10 seconds on, notice it's enough time to resaturate the muscle belly a little bit. Right, that's just looking at the oxygenation of the muscle belly. So that's the principle that we're sort of looking for, and it's going to keep the lactate at bay. All right, in that session. Now, I want to give you the opposite example. This is in our world-beating Kiwi pair, worked with in New Zealand. These are 2 of the very best rowers in the world. They're going to do a 40 on, 20 off session, 470 watts. It's massive. But these are the ones that are sitting around the, your type 3s and your type 4s. These big power outputs for long durations. And absolute beast, very lactic type session, and yeah, you can also have that with a short interval too. Again, highly versatile. I'd say probably to your point before, Natalie, with respect to the cycling, this is also another one that's probably sitting around more into the type 3, because rowing isn't too bad on the neuromuscular strain. Again, if I'm comparing it to something like running.
Right. Running is probably the most taxing and demanding from a neuromuscular perspective.
Absolutely, that's right. So again, if we're going to do a 40 on, 20 off at the same sort of parameters, yeah, absolutely. The run session.
Because as we go through this, it's like I'd be willing to bet that a lot of folks do a lot of type 4 sessions, just because of what we kind of think about, more is better and harder is better. I don't know what your perspective is on that, but do you find people are confused about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So most people don't really know this information, that you can form HIIT sessions, and you can kind of manipulate these sorts of parameters around. And HIIT does not have to be associated with no pain and no gain. In fact, that's the biggest misinterpretation of HIIT that's sort of out there. So such a vital point. And if you get if you get this stuff down, you can form those HIIT sessions appropriately, so that there's not that huge degree of no pain, no gain within them. So yeah, vital point there, Natalie.
Great.
Cool. Well, let's keep moving through. And this is repeated sprint training is the next weapon. So this is our third weapon. These are pretty good for calibration because notice the intensity is, these are all out, right? So all out short sprints. This is often used in the team sport context. So like 3 seconds on, 3 to 10 seconds on, all out, with 15 to 60 seconds, typically passive. And these ones are hitting our type 4, so these can be an all guns kind of blazing session, really hard. Or we can also just we can also have a lower aerobic contribution too, if that's not a priority for your specific person. Just some of the research that we did on this one in the lab back at ECU. So won't run this too long, but you can just kind of see an example of some of the research that we're doing on this, really looking for the oxygen draw within the muscle and really comparing the active versus the passive. We showed the same thing that we showed on that principle before. If we used passive recovery, which the subject is demonstrating here, then the subject elicited faster sprints on that treadmill. When they did the active recovery condition, the sprints weren't as high. Okay, so again, with respect to most team sports, I'll show you a team sport example here in the next video. We want to have that passive recovery typically.
Because it's a maximal effort.
You got it. You got
right.
it. So
that makes sense. Yeah, the recovery really will dictate your output in the actual work bout. That makes perfect sense.
It does when you think about it, but it's not always used across the board in throughout different sports. So here's an example from Australia from John Pryor. This is an elite rugby league team. And again, just have a look here. So this is a 5-second all-out sprint. Notice the different calibrations according to abilities and the different grid lines. So some guys are running longer, some are shorter, depending on their ability. So it's team sport. The coach has done a really good job here of trying to individualize based on previous performances. So that's really cool. But again, so that's the active or the passive recovery, and they're going back to their grid, and then that's mostly passive. And then again, it kind of repeats that through.
Gotcha. So more is not always more, especially when it comes to maximal bouts of effort.
Absolutely. But you can imagine, like, that's just a great session for trying to develop the fatigue resistance over top speed type efforts. So a super session to have in your arsenal as a coach.
And if they were to have done passive recovery, it would have caused what you saw in the lab, is it would cause more fatigue, leading to submaximal performance in subsequent sprints, which is the opposite of the intention of the drill.
That's right. Yeah. So if active recovery had been performed across that, then that would have lowered the sprint output, fatigued them faster, and we wouldn't have got into those fast twitch muscle fibers that we showed before. Spot on. Okay, so the fourth weapon is their sprint interval training, and these are the ones that really made a big hit, pun intended, on the media in the media world, where these are these are 20 to 30 second all out sprints. What just need, and with 1 to 4 minutes kind of passive, and this is these are great in the health region, need to be monitored closely, and but yeah, and we also have to realize that the aerobic conditioning is again, relative to some of the other ones, is relatively low, typically very large neuromuscular and anaerobic contributions. So some of the research that we did in the I guess in the 2000s on this one, again, notice the large increase in VO2, the large decrease in tissue oxygenation. And these ones, I mean, if you've done these ones in the health region, right, personal trainers, etc., and it's like repeated Wingate tests, repeated all out 30 seconds. They are vicious. And you just look at this expression on the subject. This is not easy work. It's absolutely all out. These green buckets are here for a reason. I remember doing this study. All right, so and you can we'll just have a look at the study. They are super fatiguing. So again, in the context maybe of any of our coaches that are out there, any of our personal trainers, they they're highly effective in a short time duration. Just have to be careful of the other factors that are around that. And again, Phil Maftone talks about the dangers of some of these, and too much of these sorts of training sessions in kind of promoting the overtraining syndrome.
Right, because of the neuromuscular demand too is very high. Yeah, kind of talking about the type fours, people maybe in the health world tend to go back to back on these just highly demanding sessions. Whereas if you were to take a step back and look at the overall intention of why am I working out X amount of days per week? What am I trying to accomplish? You might find some room to tweak some of this stuff and use different hit weapons than just one. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail kind of thing.
Yeah, classic. I love that one.
Yeah, me too.
You got it. So the last weapon is the team sport weapon of choice, our game-based high-intensity interval training. Very versatile. Notice type 2, 3, and 4s. We can, if we're clever, we can get different degrees of physiological contributions. They're self-selected, right? Because we're usually we're developing skill at the same time. It's game-related play. There's decision-making and tactics that are into these. But these are the types of sessions you can use with their athletes, where the athlete doesn't really even realize that they're getting the physiological benefits because you've created a game out of it. So it can be, quite a useful tool in the toolbox, right? So generally long interval versions with in a game-based type format. So 2 to 5 minutes of duration, and usually around 2 minutes of passive recovery, and then repeat it. So here's just an example of Martin's got some guys doing this here. You're going to see this is a game-based HIIT that's occurring there. This is he's got a small-sided game, a short interval happening on the right. Come back in and show the game-based. But it's a game simulation. We can manipulate the team court, or we can manipulate the dimensions. We can change the player numbers, right? Less player numbers over a larger field is going to probably elicit a greater intensity. We can change technical rules around. Coach encouragement is actually shown to increase intensity, and having a goalkeeper present versus not is also shown to increase the intensity of play. So loads of ways for the team sport practitioner or coach to skin it.
Right. And if the athlete isn't interested in knowing why they're doing what they're doing, they don't need to know. I mean, the coach needs to know what they want to accomplish with that HIIT training session and why. But the nice thing is you're not on a treadmill and saying 20 on, 10 off or things like that. They're just playing the sport, which is, play and enjoyment of activity is a huge qualitative part of performance, I would think.
No, 100%, absolutely. And the coaches out there know that. So this is often the bread and butter of in a coach's toolbox in terms of the session that they're going to be using.
Awesome.
So we're kind of running towards the end, and just to sort of wrap up the overall lay of the land. Again, apologies for the busyness of this, but this is really what we teach in a nutshell is appreciating context. We started out knowing that context. First and foremost, sport demands, your athlete that's in front of you, and the adaptations that you're after. Context first before the content. Then once you're ready to form the content, so many different ways that we can skin HIIT training to hit the physiological targets that we're after, right? Aerobic, anaerobic, neuromuscular, all the different targets that we can hit. And notice also that there's different HIIT formats we've learned here today. Different HIIT types. Again, this is the cool aspect of HIIT. And again, athletes love variety too in the training. So the more creative that you can kind of get with your training, but still hitting the same physiological targets, the better off that you're going to kind of be. We haven't really spoken too much about this one particular, but the neuromuscular only, the type 6, that is your concurrent training. That is your strength training session that has that neuromuscular strain component in there. So we call that a type 6 session. We didn't introduce that initially, but now you're kind of sort of seeing that. That's where that goes in the programming cycle.
Right. And anybody who's looking at this, I mean, while it looks busy at first,
Yeah.
if you start to look at it, it makes perfect sense. It's very logical. And if you're somebody who's coming from the strength training world, all of a sudden it puts into context, okay, well, I knew, obviously, I knew that strength training was, chiefly a neuromuscular strain. But if I am to fit metabolic conditioning into my program, which many people do for a lot of reasons, this is a really good decisional matrix of how and what you would fit into it so as to not put too much neuromuscular strain on yourself, right? When you're working with coaches or trainers or whatever, and they haven't worked with this, and then they see it, what are some differences that you've noticed? Like what are some kind of realizations that they've had after learning this?
Well, yeah, look, to be honest, it's for many, it's kind of a eureka moment.
Yeah,
And yeah, they're just kind of grateful that they now have this as a bit of a weapon or a power tool, or that knowledge is power kind of thing, because they feel more equipped to program their sessions appropriately for their athletes. Their athletes benefit, and they're, I guess, happier because they know they're a better practitioner. So yeah, like there's loads of testimonials. If you go on our socials, we're really blessed with the number of high-level practitioners that are saying really great things about this from around the world, across all the different sports that you'll see there. So yeah, check that out.
outstanding.
Cool. Well, again, I guess just to finish, this is really, and we spoke about this. This is, and Natalie really just nailed this point here as well. The reason why you want to, I guess, appreciate HIIT training is because of the different degrees of the physiological responses that you can get from them. And if you know that, you can manipulate your HIIT session appropriately so that you don't interfere with the other components that are important to your puzzle matrix, your programming puzzle matrix, right? And the key one that you mentioned was the neuromuscular strain. So do HIIT sessions that aren't, no pain, no gain, have the more the type 1 or the type 2 type sort of sessions in there. Or,
Definitely.
type 3.
Yeah, this gives you, it's a decisional matrix for a practitioner, and it takes a lot of, I think, the scariness and the guesswork out of programming HIIT in any setting, I would think. This is the last part, and this is a quote I pulled directly from you off of some podcast I listened to or webinar with you. This is all great science, and this is all so important for a number of different sports and training modalities. But you've said this, and I love the way you said it, is nutrition is the biggest confounder to all of this. So tell us what you mean by that. This is a UCAN, relationship that we have with you. So tell us about what you mean by that, and tell us the roles that superstarch has played in training and application for you.
Sure. So I really do believe that nutrition is one of the key, co-founders that are in there. If you're, the old saying, you can't outrun a bad diet. I really believe it. I think Tim Noakes and others have probably, professing that, and it's just, I've noticed it myself. I've noticed it in my athletes. It's why they kind of come to us, because they are often in a hurt sort of situation where their system is sort of busted down. They're in that sort of overtraining syndrome, and we make some very simple adjustments in their diet, and lo and behold, they're recovering better, and the adaptations or the response that they're getting from those HIIT sessions, well, it's forming now the adaptations. And again, we led off with the example from Kyle. He is he's the epitome of the sort of example of how big a difference this can make. And UCAN was one of his key nutrition manipulations that allowed him to elicit sort of that performance. So I guess some of the points are the role of carbohydrates in performance. Certainly, I'm not anti-carbohydrate by any means, but the right place at the right time. And for example, one of the key things that we do is we train in a high state when it's a HIIT session. Generally speaking, a lot of the times we'll use sort of a carbohydrate like a UCAN for that performance, because we know we want that energy availability in the carbohydrate form, but we don't want it with a big insulin spike. So again, this is where the UCAN is revolutionary in terms of what it does. the second point there, how the standard American diet interrupts these principles. Well, I've glossed over that, and unfortunately, it's a very inflammatory diet. So again, not eliciting sort of recovery that we're after. The role of the immune system in recovery is really not appreciated very well. And it's, if you get your immune system functioning optimally, alongside of good sleep, the two I guess interact to really elicit a real powerful recovery milieu within the body. And that's one of the key things on getting to that ultimate performance. So, and I guess we spoke about the super starch and HIIT there as well. It can be used for a given HIIT session, and certainly also used, again, we're kind of going back towards my experience with it in my Ironman triathletes. It's a key tool in the toolbox for us. And I think we'll probably discuss this in subsequent webinars in the future. Is that right, Natalie?
Yep, absolutely. Definitely. Just wanted to touch on it. One thing I had a question for is, especially for people that are doing longer bouts of duration, probably more your endurance folks. I've heard this, but have you found that people that switch from other carbohydrate sources and they switch over to super starch, have you found that they end up using fewer calories overall during those exercise training bouts?
I think so, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the key things you're trying to do typically is you're trying to lower the contribution of carbohydrate to a given session so that you're using more fat. I mean, one of the key things a lot of times these damaged athletes will come to us and they're just not metabolically flexible, right? So they're burning too much carbohydrate relative to fat oxidation. So we need to rebalance them. And to do so, we need to alter the endocrine system. And UCAN is one of the tools that you can use kind of to do that. So you can fuel with UCAN during those longer kind of training sessions. You're still going to be giving energy, but you're not going to be still eliciting these higher insulin responses. And insulin is the key hormone that's shutting down your fat oxidation. So it's one of the key little tools there. Of course, loads of ways to skin it. You could do fasted training as well, very obviously very effective. But this might just be a little bit easier or a progression more towards sort of the fasted training.
Definitely, yeah, and it's obviously not exclusive to endurance athletes. I mean, anybody doing any amount of exercise could benefit from a food product that provides stable blood sugar. It can be as simple as that, Great. Okay, so that is all that I had for today. Did you want to give us kind of a brief rundown on how you can get your online course, how you can get your ebook, things like that?
Yeah. So I think we'll just give a little bit of you can just see some of the experts of the team, I guess the practitioners that are out there, just a little hello from our different, practitioners that are also teaching. Remember, Martin and I teach the science that I've kind of gone through, but we also have the context that's given to us by many of these guys. So have a look here.
Hi there. I'm Dr. Duncan French, and I'd like to welcome you to the science and application of high-intensity interval training for combat sports.
G'day, I'm Jamie Stanley. Welcome to the science and application of high-intensity interval training for road cycling. Hi, my name is Adam Douglas. Welcome to the science and application of high-intensity interval training for ice hockey.
Hi everyone, my name is Tom van den Boelgaarden, and welcome to science and application of high-intensity interval training in swimming.
Aloha and welcome to the science and application of high-intensity interval training for triathlon.
Without further ado, welcome to the science and application of high-intensity interval for soccer. And let's get into it.
So you can see there's some pretty decent folk that we have on board to show their context at the highest of elite sport.
Yeah, and, especially that triathlon guy, huh?
Yeah, that triathlon guy. That's right.
that was Paul. That was Paul, guys.
Yeah, that's right. So I hope you'll join us there. You can see everything on HIIT Science, and it's both the book and course you can get from there. And I wanted to thank UCAN and Natalie for the opportunity to speak to everyone here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul.